Did you ever find yourself in a situation where you needed to do the same repetitive exercise over and over again? Doing double work is never fun, regardless whether you're doing this when building a bow tie or doing something else. My name is Marco, and today I will show you how to reuse your bow tie data in order to build a bow tie library using the scrapbook functionality. Before we go into the specific instruction video, it is important to understand what we mean with reusing data. So if we talk about reusing data through bow tie libraries, first I want to explain to you what we mean with a bow tie library. As you might already have experienced, or probably have experienced, when building bow ties, you sometimes need to reuse data. So for instance, a specific barrier or control might be represented on multiple places within your bow tie file. So usually when we talk about building bow tie libraries, we are talking about elements which are part of a bow tie, but might be relevant on multiple occasions and in multiple situations. Another question, which is also very relevant to this topic, is who can benefit from working with a bow tie library? So immediately my thoughts go to consultants, which might want to reuse that data when, for instance, doing workshops within their client base of one specific industry. So for instance, I have experienced situations where bow tie libraries were very handy when being used within the process safety industry in order to build bow ties for specific chemical plants, which are all familiar with the same type of barriers or same type of threat or consequences. In these cases, it might be very handy to be able to already have data which is linked to the relevant reference information. So for instance, if we're talking about a bow tie barrier and we know that for this specific bow tie barrier, it's always the same specific party who is accountable for it, and it always has the same effectiveness value or maybe SIL level assigned to it, then having that data stored in a library, which then once it's needed can be reused in a couple of clicks, can be very useful. Of course, another situation might be, for instance, an HSE manager within an organization who is more or less coordinating the building and populating of bow ties across the entire organization. Having a set of predefined elements which are already populated with the correct side information, I would like to say, can really mean a lot, as you will save a significant amount of time because you don't need to repeat that exercise over and over again. So then the next question is, what is needed in order to build a bow tie library? So of course, one of the things you will need is BowTieXP. More specifically, you will need BowTieXP Advanced. In order to achieve this, we will need to make use of the scrapbook functionality. And the scrapbook functionality is arguably the strongest feature of the BowTieXP Advanced version. And during this session, of course, you will be able to see why that is the case. Another thing which might be handy when working with bow tie libraries is having Excel available. So now we have answers to the basic questions relating the reuse of data through the bow tie libraries. In order to continue and work with bow tie libraries, I will now switch to the BowTieXP application. And first, we're going to start working with a default bow tie diagram. In order to start building a bow tie library in BowTieXP, just as mentioned, we need to use the scrapbook functionality, which is only available in BowTieXP Advanced. In order to start the scrapbook, you can go to the View, Windows, Option menu, and then choose Scrapbook. It's also accessible by using the hotkey combination Ctrl-Shift-S. Once you have opened the scrapbook, on the right side, you will see the possibility, a small X icon in order to close it, or to pin it in order to either let it collapse once you are not using it, or if you really pin it, it will remain open, which is usually highly suggested once building your bow tie library. So the first thing we can think of when building a bowtie library is that we want to reuse items we already have available in our bowtie. Of course, if you're working in the same case file, we are working in one case file and we want to transfer something from this bowtie into another bowtie, then we don't need to use the scrapbook. We can just use the copy and paste functionality. However, if you are working on this project and maybe within a month you want to reuse these items, instead of going through all of those bowties and checking for the correct elements you want to reuse, you could structure and organize them in the scrapbook. In order to do so, the first thing I want to show you is how to create a folder structure. So as you can see, with this button over here, you can add a new group. So this would allow you to pick a specific name. So we could say consequences. And then pick another one. We would be able to say threats. And then maybe add another one, which we want to call controls. So this would allow us to create a structure. From this point on, we would now be able to drag and drop specific elements into those folders. So let's start with a set of consequences. If I want to move a consequence into my consequences folder, for instance, I want to reuse fire and explosion, I want to save all those values from the risk assessment, because probably this is something which is a regular assessment in this specific industry. I would hold the Alt button on my keyboard and I would drag and drop this into the consequences container. As you can see, a number 1 is added, and when I expand this container, you will see that fire and explosion has been added. Another thing you will be able to see is that we have an additional plus in here. So when we expand the consequence further, we will be able to see all the controls which are actually part of this line. In other words, you can see that the things which are transferred into the scrapbook are still containing the hierarchy they have within the bowtie itself. So you can see the consequences, the parent, and all the controls as the children of that parent. So probably in this case, you don't want to use those controls per definition underneath this specific consequence. If that's not the case, if you don't want to have default consequences with some default controls in there, you can have it, but if you don't want to, you can always select those controls again and then delete them by right-clicking and, by pressing the delete button on your keyboard, or you can, after selecting them, drag and drop them into the correct container. So in this case, if you want to move this into the controls set, you will be able to do so. So once again, in this case, you can see that those controls also have a possibility to expand. So that's the reason behind that, is because we have questions linked to this set of controls. Of course, we want to strip that down as well. So we are going to do so. We are going to select it. We are going to press delete, confirm it. And as you can see, the first 2 controls now don't have any linked entities to it. However, for instance, the effectiveness values which were selected and linked will remain the same. You can check that by showing, for instance, the effectiveness value, just like this. And now, after we move back the ignition control and drop it on our parent, that value that is linked to this control will also be populated automatically. That's something you can double check comparing it to the initial one. So as you can see, if you already have values assigned to your bowtie elements, they will go along. So for now, let's say we don't want to use this set of items. We're just going to remove them. And finally, another thing you will be able to do is simply add elements in this specific folder structure. So let's say we want to add threats. Instead of dragging and dropping a thread from here, we could also click on this thread folder and then click on the plus button. It will create a new element. We can change the name. So this could be, for instance, corrosion. After we have provided a name, you can see an exclamation mark, which indicates that the system doesn't know which type of element this is. We can convert that into, for instance, a threat. So there it is. After we click on OK, it is transformed into a thread, and we can now put it in the correct folder. So of course, this now will become our library. The more we populate, the more we will have available for us in order to reuse. And you can imagine, if you are a consultant and you are doing this for multiple industries, you could create scrapbook files, scrapbook libraries, which you can reuse once you are working or doing something within that specific industry again. One thing which is important for everybody to remember, the corrosion thread I have created this one directly into this in the scrapbook. In that case, there are no values such as poor or good, if we're talking effectiveness, assigned to it. In other words, if we now use, for instance, this corrosion and we link it to our control, if the other threads do have additional values linked to them, you will see that corrosion will not have that. So if we are talking about type, you can see all of them are also empty because nothing was linked to them. But even if something was linked, because corrosion was not taken from an existing bow tie, but it was created from scratch, to say, it is not being populated with any additional information. So something to think about once, or if you want to pre-populate it with a certain set of informations, do that in the bow tie and then take it into the scrapbook. Or if that's not important, you can create an element directly in the scrapbook, right click on it and convert it, and then convert it into the proper element form. And after that, paste it in the correct folder. So after we are finished, we can save this. So in this case, this button is being used to open, and this one is being used to save. Just like with a regular bow tie file, you can save this as a .bts file. And of course, you can save it in any convenient place you would like to, after which you can either send it to someone else. So let's say this is our oil and gas scrapbook library. If this now is emptied, we can open it again. If we select that oil and gas scrapbook file, which we will be able to find on our desktop, you will see that those elements are available. So that would be approach number one. Just like I've mentioned, there is also the possibility to work in Excel. You might ask yourself the question, why work in Excel if I can do this in BowTieXP? Well, the answer is rather simple. Maintaining an Excel file is sometimes easier. Once you are working in Scrapbook, you can export all the files you have in here into an Excel format. Doing that will allow you to see the entire template. And that template, of course, consists of certain tabs, certain sheets, as you can see. And you might remember them because of the folders we have created in the scrapbook. So you can see we have a controls tab, which consists of two controls with certain columns in it. We have a threads column or tab with columns which relate to the thread. And we have the same thing for the consequence. If you export certain information from BowTieXP throughout the scrapbook into Excel, you will be able to find out which columns might relate to that specific entity. So if we want to have a list of consequences and we want to build that into Excel and maintain it into Excel and then just import it into the scrapbook, that would be possible as well. I would then suggest, of course, in this case, to strip down anything which is irrelevant or not needed. So for instance, the ID, parent ID, and code we can delete in this case. The name we of course want. Maybe you want a description file in there as well. All the other things we might remove as well. But maybe if you want to keep your risk assessment fields populated, you can do that as well. For the purpose of this demonstration, I will leave that out. So for now, let's say I only have an entity which defines for the software what type of element needs to be created, the name and a possible description. So now I can create additional ones. So I can say, let's create a couple more of those. Let's call them differently. Let's say fire and explosion. We can have contact with people, for instance. We could also include, let's say, a pool fire, or anything else which we want to include. And then, of course, after we are done, so let's just call this consequence 4. After we are done, we can save this. So let's just provide some descriptions as well. To description 3 and 4. So now I will save this as my Excel template file for the scrapbook. So once again, let's go into the scrapbook. Let's select and call this the scrapbook Excel library draft. And then, of course, we are going to switch back into BowTieXP. So now we are back in BowTieXP. I'm going to open a file. This, of course, is going to be that Excel file which we have saved. And as you can see, those additional consequences have been added. Of course, the purpose of me showing you how Excel works is in order for you to understand that when you export stuff to Excel, you can use the columns available there to create your own templates. The more columns you have, the more data relating to every row, which is every new element, can be stored. So if you want to include consequence types as well, you might have an additional column in there. And by building that in Excel, it might be easier to maintain it than building it first in a bowtie, then dragging it in here, and then saving it. So once you have an Excel, you can always additionally populate an Excel, save it, update it. And then once you want to use that, if it's in the correct format, you can always import it into the scrapbook and then just assign to the correct element, of course. So this is something which will be possible for you. And as you can see, because we have removed those consequence assessments, risk assessments, those are not populated compared to the ones which already were in the file. Of course, if we didn't have removed those and those were still in there and we imported it, those would be available. So this, of course, would allow you to have several ways of building your own libraries with any element in it in a structured way in order for you to populate a bowtie easy and quickly without any loss of time, which, of course, would be very valuable for you. One last thing I want to show you is a pre-created library we have available for you. This library consists of almost any element which is available in the software. As you can see, you can have your org units already preset in here. We have included all the relevant columns in here. So of course, if some of them are irrelevant to you, you can either delete them or not populate them. Of course, same is applicable to any other element. So this bowtie library is already pre-populated with many different tabs of different elements which are available within the software. We already did the dirty work for you where we included the columns which might be relevant in your case. You can populate this. Of course, you can either strip down and delete rows or columns which are irrelevant, or simply not populate them, and then no value will be linked to that element once you import it. But of course, this would be a way for you to save significant time and quickly create your own library through Excel and then utilize the scrapbook in order to build your bowties in a quick and easy fashion. So before we wrap up, let's go through the key takeaways. In order to use the scrapbook and be able to create the libraries which we have discussed, you will need BowTieXP Advanced, and that will allow you to utilize the scrapbook functionality and create those bowtie libraries, either in the library, in the scrapbook itself, or within or throughout Excel. So that immediately is also the second takeaway. You can create a library either in Excel or directly in Scrapbook. That choice depends on the amount of information you want to store in it, but also by your way of working. So if you want to quickly build your barrier library or threat or consequence library, it might be handy to do that in Excel and then import it if you already have the correct columns in place. You can do that yourself by exporting an existing element and then seeing which columns need to be there, or you can request our pre-made library template, of course. The third one is, of course, that working in Excel will require you to work in that correct template. So make sure you don't leave items or columns out which might be relevant. Usually, if you don't remove the first 2 or 3 columns, which are the entity and the name, you should at least have the minimalistic amount of information in it. But if you ever do something wrong or something doesn't work as you expect, you can always either contact us, or you can simply export an already existing element through Scrapbook and then into Excel. This will allow you to see which columns should be defined in what way. And that, of course, will allow you to understand where your mistakes are in your initial Excel import. And then, of course, that last point is all about creating that template. So building that template might take you a little amount of time, but it will save you a lot of time if you have it in place. So either start working within Scrapbook, drag and drop the items you want from the bow ties you have into that structured library Scrapbook file, or do the same thing within Excel. But either way, make sure you use and utilize the correct template. So with that being said, I want to thank you all for watching this instruction video. If you want to learn more, you can always visit our website, www.cgrisk.com. I want to thank you for your time. Stay safe and have a very nice day. Bye-bye.